Hi guys, welcome back to OC Avery and welcome back to the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room. Now today I'm joined by Mr. Mark Jones. So what we do today is we focus on some of the birds that he keeps and breeds, such as the bramble finches, the linnets and the bullfinches, with loads more. With many years of experience from Mark himself, but also his father Walter, who famously exhibited the clear goldfinch mule at the National Exhibition in the 90s. We talk about plenty of things like that, and you're going to see an awful lot of that in today's video. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room. Now, just before we get into it, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, Avian World Dublin, for sponsoring the Natives in Norwich. So let's get into this video. Okay, hello and welcome back to the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room. Now today we have a special guest, Mr. Mark Jones. So thank you very much for joining us. So could you just please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the birds you keep?
Yeah, it's Mark Jones here, speaking from Llanrwst, which is a market town in the Conwy Valley, in the county of Conwy in North Wales. So I've been associated with birds since sort of mid-1960s by my father, Walter Jones. So I've had an involvement and interest ever since, sort of feeding the birds. You know, when I was a youngster and at home, doing all the local shows and some of the bigger shows, nationals and so on. I left home in 1987 and then set up on my own really. So from that day onwards, I've been keeping breeding and showing British hardbills, the odd mule hybrid, but not many.
Yeah.
So along the way, I've kept siskins, lesser redpolls, linnets, goldfinches, bullfinches, bramble finches, chaffinches, and greenfinches, and that's the sum total.
Got you.
So breeding them with and without success over the years.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, obviously plenty of experience and hopefully plenty to learn from today's episode. Now, I'd like to start by talking about the bramble finches. There's something that's not as commonly kept as other hardbills, and something not often talked about. So, to begin with, how do you compare these birds when, you know, if you compared them to breeding other native finches? How do they differ and how are they similar?
Well, I guess they're most similar to chaffinches, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not the easiest to breed. I guess with comparison, or when comparing with things like linnets and siskins, you know, they need a bit more space, I would say, and they're a bit more insectivorous. So, but they're quite a hardy bird. You know, in the distant past, you know, we saw certainly in the southeast, Norfolk, you get fairly large classes of bramble finches and chaffinches. So that seems to be the area of these isles where they were sort of most seen on the show bench. But they are a fine finch, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've rarely seen them, and I've been lucky enough to see wild ones, and they are really an absolutely stunning finch. So, you know, something that I definitely like to get into. Now, when you're breeding these guys, what sort of size flight are you breeding them in, or do you cage breed them?
I've never tried to cage breed them, nor would I. I think they're a bit too lively for that, really. They need space. And they need you know, to rear. I think they need live food.
Yeah.
So the current. So I had them last year in a flight which was about 4 foot wide and about 4.5 foot deep and about 6 feet high. This year it's double that size. When I first bred them, they were in a fairly large flight, which is probably about 8 foot by about 6 foot wide and about 8 foot high.
Yeah.
So they need space. They need space, and they need. When it comes to the reaving, they need, you know, initially small, soft live food. In my experience, yeah.
Yeah. What sort of live food are we talking here? Like mealworms, pinkies, waxworms, or something different?
I think initially something smaller is best. You know, I've got great faith in green fly. You know, when I first started keeping birds.
Yeah.
Going back to the sort of late 80s, it seems to be more present, you know, in the community. So I can go out in the morning before work and collect it off nettles. then I used to snip nettles, find an area where the green fly were on the nettle. I'd snip 3 or 4 and put them into a carrier bag, then lay them on the aviary floor, and the bird to take from there. As the chicks get bigger, they'll take larger sized live food. A reader of cage and aviary birds put me in touch with a company that sells mini waxworms
Right.
this year, and so I was lucky this year in the sense that the green fly was still on the nettles, which I plant in the aviaries
Yeah.
for the green fly. So there was some of that left when the chicks hatched, and within 3 or 4 days they're onto the mini wax moths. Then beyond that, soft mealworms. And as the chicks get bigger and stronger, then they'll take hard skinned. But I ideally want soft skinned live food. I mean, the hen did take some egg food and some egg, but she's looking for soft protein really initially in the first few days. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, would is your egg food mix? Is it sort of the standard sort of egg food mix, or do you give them sort of a soft bill egg food mix for the insect and the soft like
Yeah,
that
I
sort
do
of
a bit of
style?
both. It's mainly the stuff we use for the finches, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've got some name of the bleeding. It might be Quickle. There is it's like a brown soft food mix. I mean, on the tin, the label, I think there's maybe a miner and a goldfinch. So it's a base. There is probably about a third is a soft bill type mixture.
Right. Got you.
There's dried insects in there, which goes in with the egg food. But the hen I'm using tends to look more for the egg. The boiled egg we use, yeah,
Yeah.
than anything. Yeah.
Right. Wow. I mean, that's interesting. Obviously, I know with them being quite similar to chaffinches that live food is probably, like you say, more readily taken. So I imagine they are quite an expensive bird to keep for that. Having to feed them all this live food.
Yeah, it's not just to say. I mean that they are. They'll take seed through the not an issue. It's just when you've got chicks, yeah.
Yeah.
So it didn't cost me that much. I bought a batch of mini wax moth, about 20 quid, and then
Right.
after that, a batch of mini mealworms, say 20 quid's worth, and I'm basically home and dry then. So
Yeah.
it's and the problem with last year, sorry, was the hen was looking to feed the chicks from day one, but the stuff she had wasn't small enough for her to feed.
Oh, right.
So I
Wow.
struggled last year.
Okay. Fair enough. Understood. So they're quite territorial, I believe, during the breeding season. So do you leave both the cock and the hen in to rear the youngsters, or do you always take the cock bird out?
No, I mean, I've had the pair in the past. I had a pair. What happened in the past, believe it or not, I took the mother-in-law to the airport. It must have been in July, first thing in the morning. I must have fed the birds before I left. Came back and the bloody hen was gone. She must have walked out, and as I walked in, but the cock then, the chick's about a week old, and the cock reared on himself. That was when I
Right.
first bred them. This year, the cock was starting to drive the hen after about a week. So I took him out and
Yeah.
I bloody lost him. I lost him. He flew past me. But he was trying to drive the hen. But I think he was on the verge then of looking to feed the chicks too.
Yeah.
So I think they're okay as a pair. I would say in a large flight. I haven't troubled them in the past, but this time he was starting to drive her. So I took him out. But that may be a mistake.
Yeah. No, got you. Fair enough. Obviously, I guess it would depend on the individual bird as well. Perhaps you
Yeah,
got lucky,
yeah.
with a cockbird that'll feed. So then it comes to the molting side and the show side of the of brambles. So do you colour feed them, or do you just leave them to naturally colour up?
Yeah, there are some birds which I don't think colour feeding has any effect on them at all.
Yeah.
So we leave them. There was a fellow called Monty Ackerman who with a lovely Bramble finch hen going back probably to the early 80s. I think he was from Yorkshire. He used to colour feed the bird. You could see that his feet were bloody orange, but I don't think colour feed has any effect on them. There's on some birds, but not
Right.
on brambles. So we don't bother.
Okay. Nope. Fair enough. So then, a bramble on your show team. What do you look for in a bramble for the shows?
I mean, the sort of the mantra I use when looking at showbirds is in essence shape and colour. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's a bit more than that, but in essence, you're looking for a fairly well-shaped bird. So you're looking for, width really of chest, yeah. A
Yeah.
good head on the bird, obviously, a good rise above good width of head and rise above the beak. One of the main features is what's called the apron, yeah. So like a
Yeah.
waistcoat. So a good rich on the cockbirds, a good rich sort of horse chestnut brown is ideal. You want the colour to be uniform, and you
Yeah.
want that waistcoat to be as deep as possible, really. And on the flanks, we have like work that needs to be present and expressed by the bird when it's in the cage. Hens
Yeah.
tend to be a little less colourful, but again, the flank work. Often references made to the spangling on the back of the bird, but I mean, it is obviously relevant, but you don't often see, what you see in a bird normally is the front, isn't it?
Yeah.
To the back of the bird. So it's basically a good shaped bird, which is, fairly cobby, good width across the chest with a good apron, good colour,
Got you.
uniformity.
Right. So, are the brambles quite a timid bird, a flighty bird? So they take a bit more work in a show cage to sort of steady them down.
They can be, but I mean, in my experience, they steady fairly well. I mean, the birds I've got here now, okay, the mother, she'll take stuff up my hand, as
Right.
will the chicks. So that's so I don't envisage any problems with them. I think within the show season they'll probably be reasonably steady.
Got
I
you.
don't see a problem.
Right. Okay. Well, fair enough. Well, that's great. Thank you for obviously sharing your experience with the brambles. Something that hopefully a lot of more people would like to get into. So, now on to the linnets that you keep. So, do you cage breed your linnets or do you flight breed them?
I've on one occasion I think I've bred them in cages in the past, but flights are better.
Right.
As you said earlier, really, I mean, birds are like people, and they've all got different personalities. You will get some hens that will breed, and I think if you've been breeding them, the longer you've had a family of birds, the longer that the more several generations. Once they get used to you and your premises, then they're more likely to breed in a cage. So they will.
Yeah.
You've got a better chance in a flight, in all respects, I would say. Yeah.
Right. So, in your flights when you're breeding the linnets, then do you try and keep it minimal, or do you add a lot of cover for these?
I give a fair bit of cover. I
Right.
mean, I think it's a balance. Some people put very little in, and I think you can overdo it. I
Yeah.
think I'm always mindful of put yourself, I suppose, in a room with one piece of bloody furniture, or it can be well decorated, can it?
Yeah.
But it's better for the mind, in it. And I think the birds feel safer. I mean, I've got a hawk round here. It's the same damn hawk, but hawks visit my garden regular. There was a
Yeah.
sparrowhawk here today. So if they've got plenty of cover within which to hide, then that's good. Within which to nest and feel secure, that's good. Too much cover, you'll hardly ever see them. So
Yeah.
I tend to sort of, put cover into the corners. So 3 corners of the 4 corner flat will be covered in, not just to nesting, but also to roosting. Yeah.
Yeah. Got you. No. Well, that's great. Thank you. So, um, linnets again, something I don't have a lot of experience with anyway. Do they suffer from any sort of common diseases similar to like a greenfinch would suffer from coccidiosis?
Yeah, yeah, you've got to watch them for that.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, my opinion with regard to what we call going light. I mean, none of us, I don't suppose, are experts in the science of the conditions that these birds suffer from, but they are pretty similar and possibly the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think canaries suffer the same, but to a much lesser degree, and I suspect it's been bred out of them over generations. And I do think that, in essence, the condition is passed from the parents to the chicks, and it's
Right.
not a problem. It's not a problem until the chicks get stressed, and that stress can be lack of food, it can be fright, lack of water, anything that causes stress seems to lower the immune system, and then in comes the bug. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had problems, not on all occasions, but some occasions in the past I've had problems with young linnets. Once they get to maturity, they seem to be fine. I've lost young birds in the past, but now I put them on a not before they're ill. I'll treat them if they start showing symptoms of going light. I'll treat them.
Right.
I've used cranberry juice diluted in the past. I tend to use the pigeon, was it Harker's, training
Yeah.
for coccidiosis. Now that seems to do the trick with them and goldfinches and others, you know.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you. So it is again just it's more keeping on top of it and reducing stress where you can, so they aren't picked off.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in in medicating birds before they're ill. I don't
Yeah.
believe in that. If you keep a close eye on them, you'll often see one. If one goes off, normally the rest will follow suit, won't they?
Yeah.
So if you intervene quickly and give them a general treatment for coccidiosis, that tends to do the trick.
Got you. Brilliant. So in captivity, then, male linnets don't really tend to get that rose chest that we see
Yeah,
in the wild. What do you think we're missing in captivity, which the birds are getting in the wild?
I'm not really sure that we are. I'll explain that to you. I where I live is on the edge of Snowdonia National Park, and I do a bit of trout fishing as a hobby. And up on the hills in the summer, we see linnets, right? And they're
Yeah.
as red as your t-shirt, the cockbirds. What they are, in my view, is buff birds. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had one of those and put it in a cage and mulched it, it would be grey and colourless, in my view.
Right.
The strains of linnets we have, the sort of kind of brown linnets, traditionally found in Ireland, don't tend to, show that colour. And I think that's in the feather, yeah.
Yeah.
The best coloured linnets that we tend to see on the show bench, colour fed, ain't going to come out red like that, are they?
No.
I don't think the feather carries that ability. So, you know, if you look at the standards for linnets in terms of the show standard, we're not looking for red, are we? We're
No.
looking for a
Yeah.
rich nutty brown, and I think that's a consequence of that particular strain of linnets. Yeah?
Right.
Uh, so, as I said, the ones you see certainly around here in the wild are as buff as hell.
Yeah.
But they are red. I don't know what causes that. But if they weren't colour fed and they're on the show bench, you wouldn't look twice at them.
Right. Fair enough. So you think it's more the selective breeding side is that it's actually been bred out of them as opposed to missing something really.
Yeah, I think in the old days when it was legal to catch birds, the birds that were caught and which were attractive to the people who showed birds were the brown linnets,
Yeah.
with the nutty rich brown colour, yeah, and that's what we've got in strains today.
Right.
I'm sure the likes of Jack Lloyd's birds, certainly the hens, but most of the cocks, I'm sure, they're a rich brown colour, aren't they?
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah, no, that's an interesting take on it. Something I've not heard before. I've obviously had a lot of with not enough wild seed or something else, but I can't see why you would be wrong there. Actually, I think that's a really good thought. So then we'll move on to your goldfinches. Obviously, quite a commonly kept native finch. So what methods do you use to breed your goldfinches?
I've not been breeding them for that long, in truth. I mean, I've kept them on and off over the years, mainly to show and not with a focus on breeding. But I had some birds off Johnny Ball, who was fairly prominent as an exhibitor down South London area some years ago. He had a good strain of red poles, and when he packed in, he'd give me his red poles and he'd give me some goldfinches. So I've been breeding them for about 6 years, with fairly good success. I've only bred one this year, but previous years I'm breeding half a dozen or more. I don't find them that difficult, in truth, in the flights. Up till this year, I've bred reasonably well. They tend to have a clutch, they hatch, they rear. But flights, same type of, I suppose, program as the linnets, as the siskins, as the red poles. You soak seed, you take
Yeah.
food, cover. I let them build their own nests. And don't
So
make
a
much
a
profit.
freestanding nest as opposed to a
I'm,
line.
yeah, I rather, my preference is to let them build their own. Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a bit of doing in terms of gathering. I mean, it's like the bullfinch; you've got to gather the roots and all that.
Yeah.
For goldfinches, it's more like fine grasses and horsehair and mosses and so on. But that's what I'd rather they do is build their own nest.
Yeah.
And largely they do. I've no problem with that.
That's brilliant. But yeah, most people obviously use a liner, so it's an interesting take on getting them to take their own, and obviously there is the hard work behind it. Obviously, having to gather stuff, but yeah, that's what comes with keeping birds. So, what about the cockbird? Do you ever remove the cockbird? I've heard that they can have some issues with cockbirds smashing eggs
Yeah,
and throwing chicks.
yeah. I mean, that's tended to be an issue more so for the people who breed mules and they got them in cages. It's
Yeah.
not troubled me until this year. This year, a cockbird with a hen, um, she laid, I think, 4 eggs, no problem. They hatched. They were with her for 2 days, fed, and then they stopped. So on the
Right.
face of it, he wasn't a problem. I then put another hen in with him, and the eggs were being broken. I don't know if that was him or her,
Right.
in the same flight. So I don't know whether I've got a problem with him. But prior to that, his father and other goldfinch cocks that I've used haven't been a problem in flights with a bit of space,
Yeah.
with the hens and the eggs, not a problem. So I think he may be a one-off. But I do think space does help them. It helps them exercise and they get a bit of the tensions, out of the system.
Yeah.
So there is a problem with them, but I'm not in the habit of separating them.
Got you. No, okay, fair enough. And yeah, I guess it's distracting them, keeping them active, having them in flights as opposed to, like you say, in a
Yeah,
cage. There's not much to do
of
in there.
course.
So,
Yeah.
what about so for rearing goldfinches then? Obviously, you mentioned soak seed and egg food. Do you offer live food for these guys as well?
Yeah, for me, it's green fly if I can get it. Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
green fly for me, I plant nettles in all my flights for the sole purpose of getting green fly. So that normally arrives sort of April, May, and it'll
Right.
go through June into July. So it does run out normally. That's the best. What I tend to do is either snip a piece of nettle or just cut a leaf off and lay that, on the base of the area where they feed, and they'll pick the green fly off that. The other thing which they have, which is probably as good as maybe, is the peas. They do
Yeah.
like that, and it's kind of soft protein, isn't it?
Yeah.
My view is that the birds will feed, what they're comfortable with. It tends to be, soft protein, egg likes they like raw egg, so they get
Right.
that too. So that's the start, and as you find, as the chicks get stronger, what they'll feed changes. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they'll put more seed into them and more hard seed into them as the chicks develop. But initially, they want soft stuff. So we're talking about egg, peas, green fly,
Got you.
mealworms. So I don't. I mean, I get mealworms, but that's more so for the likes of the brambles. But they will take them. But I think they prefer
Yeah.
peas and the like, and certainly green fly.
Got you. But that's great. That's brilliant. Thank you. Obviously for sharing that again. Yeah, it's something where I've heard people don't give them any live food and have success, but obviously, more referring to nature is probably the best way. So goldfinches with their blaze then. Do you colour feed your goldfinches or do you leave them completely natural?
The colour I've got in mind is from the parentage. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a friend from Cork who was referred to. There's a product called Mask, isn't it? That's
Yes.
advertised. He tells me that works, and I never tried it. You can't really use well, you can if you want, but I wouldn't advise people using Caterpillar red, because you end up messing up the flights, don't you?
Yeah. You get orange bars, I think, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, but that's not really what we want in the standard. You're looking for, a golden yellow flight, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced. I'm not saying I've got the best coloured goldfinches. Mine aren't. They're pretty decent, but I'm not sure they'd be improved by any product in truth.
Yeah.
So the answer in simple terms is no, we don't colour feed them. A good diet is going to give them the blaze they've got, really, and that's really a consequence of inheriting the feathers, of their parents, isn't it?
Yeah. So actually, that's does bring us on quite nicely to about breeding for colour. So, do you when you're pairing your birds, do you look for yellow to buff pairings, or are you going for more yellow to yellow for that colour? And it might, it might reduce size, but obviously improving
Yeah.
the colour.
I'm not sure I'm that clever when it comes to defining what's yellow and buff. I mean, some birds are obvious, but some aren't. So it's a bit easier with canaries, but when it comes to things like bullfinches and the like, it's not so obvious. But for me, I take back to the two fundamentals: is shape and colour, isn't it?
Yeah,
I try and pair with those two in mind. And I appreciate what you say. You know that the best of colour birds tend to not have the shape
yeah,
of the worst of colour birds. Yeah, we're on about feathering, aren't we?
yeah,
But you can get some very, very good shaped and coloured birds. That's the objective, isn't it?
yeah,
So it's looking. I mean, in the past, whenever we all keep birds, but if my advice to anyone would be, if you stumble across, buy or inherit whatever the best of anything, could be the best yellow hammer hen or the best chaffinch cock, then my advice would be get the very best that you can put with it and breed from them.
right,
But yeah, in general, I do think about the qualities, of the birds when I pair them.
yeah,
Of great importance is the head, yeah. And we
yeah,
don't want big-bodied birds with small heads. It's like putting a pea on top of an orange. It don't look right, does it? They've got to be
no,
in proportion.
yeah, got you. So, yeah, it's not always. Yeah, it's always keeping the standard in mind,
Yeah.
more than feather type. So, uh, we'll talk about your bullfinches next. So, probably already know the answer with how obviously how you breed your birds, but is it cage breeding or flight breeding for your bullfinches?
I've only ever bred them in flights. I bought a block of Italian cages years ago, and that was to try and reduce the number of birds going lights. It's got like a tray system where the droppings drop through. So I bought a block of cages. They were more sort of like canary type size cages, and after that I bought a block of 6 big cages.
Right.
Same design for the purpose of trying to breed bullfinches in them, but I didn't succeed. I'm not saying that I never would, because my father used similar type cages in terms of size anyway for breeding bullfinch hybrids. So I probably could breed them in them, but my first attempt failed. And before then and since then, I've only ever bred them in flights.
Right. Okay. So what sort of size flights are you looking for the bullfinches?
And what I've got here, what did I say? They're I'd say about 4 foot wide, 4.5 foot deep, and about 6 foot higher. But
Yeah.
they'll breed in smaller than that. If you've got the space, the more the merrier, really.
Yeah. Okay. So then they commonly suffer from gaping.
Yeah.
There's numerous theories for what it's caused by, air sac mite and different things like that. So, have you ever cured this? And what medication would you use to try and treat this?
I'm not sure that I have. The thing is, I mean, the truth is, I don't know how many bullfinches I've kept and bred over the years. I think I've only ever had 2 that I can remember that have actually suffered with the condition. Yeah,
Yeah.
and both have come in. So I had one off my father, a cockbird, a very good bird, years ago, and he suffered with it. And I've got one here now, which came off my friend Michael Shullen, and that bird gapes on and off.
Right.
So what I did with him, I put him on a treatment for fungus,
Yeah.
and that seemed to sort of cure it. But it's back now, so I'm not sure. And I've got some Thailand here, which is an antibiotic for respiratory conditions. I think it's it's been produced for the pig industry.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't like to guess what causes. It could be mite, it could be fungal, infection. I said the cockbird I've got here now. He's the father of the chicks out here. It's on and off with him.
Right.
So why have I not really suffered from it? Other than birds that have been brought in, and I've brought other birds in that haven't had it. But the ones I tend to breed and keep here don't suffer from it. And I whether that's because I the way I keep them, I don't know. They are a bird which I presume out there eat an awful lot of blood, buds. They probably
Yeah.
don't eat as much seed as some of the other hardbills. So I try and give them, berries as regular as I can. I'll give them buds, cherry tree bud. If someone's doing or trimming a cherry tree, it'll be sort of springtime. I'll take the buds and offer them then.
Yeah.
I've been giving them a bit of hawthorn, blackthorn, again before the spring. So I think the diet may have some part in keeping it at bay.
Right. It, I've seen some people obviously more commonly have suffered from it from having birds indoors in cages. So perhaps with obviously you having them outside, they've got that
Yeah.
constant fresh air going through, removing any dust and anything in the air that's not great. So I imagine that does contribute as well as the constant supply of fresh air and obviously airflow. So yeah, it
It's quite
sounds.
possible. It may well be we're dealing with more than one cause, or it may be a single cause. I don't know, but so no doubt fresh air helps. That's what they're adapted to, isn't it?
Yeah, got you. So, we overall, when actually, sorry, where are we? Actually, we spoke about colour actually. So, recently in the August 18th edition of your Cage and Avery magazine, the Cage and Avery magazine, you spoke about the green fly. So, is it more? Do you always try and attract them with growing the nettles in the aviaries, or you actually supplying the habitat there in your aviaries as well as collecting them?
Yeah, it's the habitat now. Like I say, when I first going back to the late 80s, I could before work in the morning, I could walk up the road with a pair of scissors and a carrier bag, and I could find a patch of netland script, snip half a dozen plants which were full, underneath the leaves and the stalks, full of green fly. Put them
Yeah,
into a carrier bag, take them on, put them on the aviary floor, and the bullfinches would be down straight onto them. I find less and less. It's not just them now, but the insect life is less for God knows what only reasons. But there's quite a few references to that. I don't know if it's pesticides or what. So now I grow nettles in every flight. I mean, it's not wall to wall nettle. There'll be a good clump in each. And as I say, come April, May, the place is full. The stalks and the underleaf is
yeah.
full of green fly. So it's a great source of live food, for the finches to commence the rearing.
Yeah, well, I guess just bringing it back to nature, as you've said, is something that they're going to rear on naturally anyway. So it could only benefit the birds by having access to something like that.
Yeah.
So absolutely brilliant. So it takes us really to our final question, which is, what has been the best native bird that you've ever had between you and your father?
I wouldn't like to say it in fairness. I mean, my father been very fortunate really in terms of what he's won. I mean, the most famous of his birds was the clear Goldfinch Mule.
Yeah,
I mean, that was bought from Dublin. I remember the story behind that bird was it was the Irish National. God knows what year it was, but the Irish National, and Walter was judging the Irish National, so he went there on a Friday afternoon with a couple of friends. I was actually showing my birds in a local show at Bethesda, so I went across on a Saturday afternoon. I met up with him. A friend got me at the port, went to the show, and I saw the bird, and I couldn't keep my eyes off it. And I thought, well, I better not stand here for much longer. Just increase the price.
yeah,
So it wasn't in the best of nick. It was a bit dirty, and the cage floor was full of like oats.
right,
I think it was an unflighted bird. It won something, but it didn't win best new hybrid. And I said to my father, that will win best bird in show in the national. That was my thought. And a few weeks later, it was bought. It didn't win nothing for 12 months. But when it did take off, it took off good and proper. So that's probably, you can't ignore that bird. The best bird I ever had, I bred, it was a bullfinch hen. And
right,
I don't know, in the early 90s, I think it was. And I showed that in Yorkshire. It was probably about 1,000 bird show then, and it was best unflighted birding show, and it was a really special. It was off Irish bullfinches, so a lovely, lovely chocolate colour, great shape. It wasn't small. It was a wonderful bird, and I planned to show at the Scottish National that year. That's where it was going, and I moved house at the bloody time, and so all my birds went to Walters, and the bird injured a foot, so I couldn't show it again.
Oh, right.
But a sister went then. I think she was best opposite sex and flighted at the Scottish National that year. In the All British that year, her sister was best unflighted, hard-billed champion, hen, best unflighted. A brother was second best unflighted cock, and a father, the bird out of Walter, was best champion flighted hard-billed cock. So they were a very, very good family of birds, but she was outstanding. And I lost the family after a few. I couldn't keep enough of them, in truth, to keep the family going, but she was a wonderful bullfinch, and that, I'd say, by a long shot, was the best bird I've ever had.
Brilliant. I mean, obviously you've kept so many birds out over that time that that really must have been a special bird. And obviously I've seen photos of the famous clear Goldie Mule, and yeah, what an amazing bird that was. So absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing. Just, I imagine, just a little drop of your knowledge on the British birds. So, is there anything else you'd like to mention, or any more unmissable tips for viewers before we end this call?
Well, all I would say is, thanks for the opportunity. My involvement in caging aviary birds only came as a consequence of reading the bleeding thing and seeing much about budgies and not much about our side of the fancy. So if no one's going to put anything in, or they don't put much in on a regular basis, I'll do something, which I've tended to do. So I sit here before you, not claiming to be a specialist or an expert. I just have a very, very deep interest and involvement in the hobby.
Yeah.
So anyone out there, I would say to you, enjoy your birds. Don't keep too many. Keep enough. So it's not a labour. It should be a labour of love, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
So look after them. Keep just enough and not too many. Enjoy breeding them, and if you can, show them. But it is a great hobby. I wouldn't be without the birds. I'll never be without them. We ain't got enough youngsters coming through, but that's the same in a lot of hobbies this day and age. So I'm not too negative about that. I think we just need to advertise ourselves a wee bit more. So I'm involved in a couple of local clubs. We never used to get involved, me and my father. We just showed and showed and showed. But now I'm getting involved in a couple of local clubs to try and give them a bit in terms of keeping them going. But my plan there is to try and get involved in the primary schools and get kids into the knowledge of the hobby.
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
We also need to, the people who buy bird food for the bird feeders in the garden need to know that we exist.
Yeah.
I think some of them probably would like to have a flight, maybe keep a few birds, canaries or siskins or whatever. So I think we've all got a duty to promote this great hobby whilst we carry on enjoying it. So yeah, it's great. It's nice to see you.
Yeah,
well, anyone else who's there, but it is a wonderful hobby. It's quite frustrating at times, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I've lost some young birds in the past, and I'm depressed for a day or a week. But you pick yourself up, don't you? But no, it's I'll be with it.
Yeah.
For as long as we can, as long as I'm here, I'll be going up and down the country and showing birds, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing everything, and great last words. Thank you ever so much. Yeah.
That's grand.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, guys, that does bring us to the end of this episode of the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room. So I hope you've enjoyed it and found some useful tips. I sure have, and I think it's been great to be joined by Mark and have a good chat about different birds like that. Obviously, some birds that aren't commonly kept and aren't commonly talked about. You know, I'd love to get some bramble finches, but don't really know many people with them, and there's not an awful lot of information on there. So hopefully, that's something that you'll be able to see on this channel shortly. If I do be, I'm able to pick up a pair of brambles, maybe even linnets, and we'll do something like that. But anyway, huge thank you to Avian World Dublin for sponsoring this video of the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room and the Natives in Norwich group. If you'd like to see more, smash the like button, hit subscribe down below, and I'll see you in the next video.